In our previous episode, we made the Kingmaker sword out of Damascus. It was a really cool build, and that was for the first place trophy for the Crucible event by Albion Online. But today we're gonna make the second and third place prize, the Twin Slayer Daggers, and not only that, we're gonna forge them out of titanium.
Look at those colors. Titanium is kind of a weird material. Well, it was first discovered at the end of the 18th century simultaneously in England, France, and Russia. However, we didn't learn how to actually get it up until the 20th century, at least in any meaningful or pure amounts. In its metallic form, it's very, very flammable within a gas atmosphere, meaning it binds to gases. If you heat it up in the forge, as soon as it's hot, it starts forming an oxide layer as well as the alpha casing, that is, the oxygen penetrates the titanium, making a very hard surface that is prone to cold shutting and cracking. Now, when you make titanium out of titanium ore, you cannot do it the way you do with steel. When we make steel, we take out the oxygen in the oxide is the ore, by presenting carbon gas to interact with the oxygen, leaving iron. And the more carbon we introduce beyond what is necessary to reduce the oxide into iron, we're getting steel or cast iron. Titanium doesn't work like that. Eventually we figured out that once we introduce chlorine gas instead of carbon like we would do in steel, titanium actually starts reducing from titanium oxide into its metallic form. The cool thing about titanium is also that we were using it before we were using its metallic form. At the mid-19th century to the late 19th century, white paints in painting were introduced using titanium oxide, and you can still buy it today. From the mid to the late 19th century, titanium oxide is introduced into the field of painting. You can see that in the works of some impressionists, and you can still buy titanium oxide white today. So we were using titanium as an element in chemistry before we were using it in its metallic form. In its metallic form, it was introduced to the aviation industry because it's much less prone to fracture and much less prone to shrinking and expanding with heat. So the obvious industry was the aerospace industry. To forge titanium, you have to keep in mind the chemical and physical properties of the material. So, although it has a very high melting temperature, so you're unlikely to burn your piece or have it melt away, you still have to keep in mind the ability of titanium to absorb oxygen and absorb carbon. So, whenever you try to sand-my or forge weld titanium to steel, the carbon from the steel gets sucked in and forms carbides. That is the exact problem early chemists had in trying to reduce titanium ore into the material itself. So you couldn't use carbon, they figured out chlorine instead. I already covered it. However, the absorption of oxygen from the atmosphere into the surface of the material makes it very, 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 very prone to cold shuts. It basically forms cracks and shuts on its outer surface on a smooth spot. So in order to forge something useful out of titanium in forge atmosphere and not at a factory, you have to forge things a little bit bigger, a little bit wider, and a little bit thicker because you're accounting for later on having to grind quite a bit of it back. Additional limitations of forging titanium in our conditions is that you can't really do shapes that are too sophisticated or require a lot of bend, unbend, bend, unbend, because you will form cracks. Thus, you always have to have a plan in mind how every subsequent step is going to connect to the previous before you even begin. Keeping these limitations of the material in mind, I still have to make two virtually identical pieces that will go to two actual people who will hold them. So as I'm working, I'm paying careful attention that I'm working on both pieces semi-simultaneously. That way, the difference between them will be minimal. And subsequently, Matt has a more difficult job of doing the same thing as he grinds the material. Keep in mind, titanium oxide and the alpha casing on titanium is harder than some of the abrasives we use in the shop. Obviously, when our piece is black, we can't use normal belts, we can't use normal abrasion discs. So what we did do is we took masonry bits and started removing some of this to break right through the obnoxious, super hard layers of oxide and alpha casing, and then we'll go back to the standard metal abrasives like belts and form the piece completely. See this yellow right here? That's titanium oxide. That's what the gold stuff to cover your drill bits you buy at Home Depot. Especially if you grind with the corner of the belt, it's like really good. But until you do that, it's going to be really bad.
While I start the long and arduous task of grinding the first titanium blade, Ilya is going to get to work forging the second one. Now, every once in a while I'm going to have to lend him the blade that I'm grinding on for him to be able to check and compare the sizes so that the second one matches the first one perfectly.
A few days into grinding these blades, I'm starting to remember why I promised myself that I would never grind or make another titanium sword blade after we made the Hawkeye sword. It's just a lot of work, a lot of belts, and it smells really bad, to be perfectly honest.
So the main reason that we even decided to suffer through making titanium blades again is because we know that we can turn that a really nice colored blue using the kiln.
One of the main challenges about these blades are these little spiky points. Keeping them nice and crisp and keeping those transitions really defined. I'll be working primarily on the edge of the platen, kind of feathering it in as I go, but also making sure that I keep it nice and flat so those grinds are really distinct.
Grinding these blades took several days, and sometimes I took the blades home, and now I'm back to the shop. Basically, doing grinding as much as I can wherever I am, but I do like to come back and do the finishing on the baiter with the larger contact wheel. Using the larger contact wheel will leave us a much smoother finish, and remember, with titanium, we're gonna try to anodize it later in the kiln, and that surface has to be as smooth and even as possible. There's no great way to show you guys how long it took to grind these blades, and I'm not gonna make this video 8 hours of just grinding titanium. If it gives you any indication, it took about 24 to 27 belts a piece for each blade, and that means 4 grits per blade of each grit. Yeah, titanium, it's the nature of it. It sucks to grind. With the rough grinding on the blades now finished, it's now time to start sculpting on the hilt pieces that Ilya forged while I was grinding these blades. With the langettes now sculpted, it's time to move on to the guard and then the pommel. These are pretty simple sculpts, basically peaks to the center and all the different areas, and then we'll move on to polishing. With the 2 basic components of the hilt now sculpted, Ilya is going to carefully fit them on the blade and get them welded together into one piece. The way that we're going to connect our steel hilt and our steel pommel to a titanium blade is to connect them all onto a piece of pipe. Before we do that with the piece of pipe, we want to make sure that we ovate the round pipe so that it gives a better grip.
With these Twin Slayer Daggers, we're sharing the same objective that we had when we made the Kingmaker sword for the first place trophy, and that is that we want these to look real, make them look like relics. So once again, we'll be using real gemstones. This time, we're using turquoise. Hand-faceted turquoise gems for the guard? Check. Amethyst crystals for the pommel? Check. One of the attachments that really is going to help with the finishing on these blades is this rolling platen. That basically turns your platen into a contact wheel with that soft rubber backing. You see, this blade has a lot of sharp transitions, and being able to have that rubber backing is going to allow me to kind of jam in a little bit on the corners, crisp them up, and smooth them over at the same time, if that makes sense. Trust me, this rolling platen is going to come in clutch on this project.
To get a solid blue color on our 2 titanium blades in the kiln's not that difficult, holds a very steady temperature. However, we're going for a faded color, so we kind of have to keep taking it in and out and checking it as we go until we get just the right fade.
Well, we were reluctant to work with titanium ever again, but for this project, I think that was appropriate. And Albion just released a major update on April 13th, Radiant Wilds. And the game is also releasing on Xbox on April 21st. So that is the perfect opportunity for new players to start playing, the old ones coming back, and enjoy the new visual overhaul. And if you enjoyed this video, or even if you hate it, don't forget to tell us in the comments below. And don't forget to like the video, and if you're not subscribed, subscribe or I'll beat you.
Be sure to use the link in the description to check out Albion Online, and if you haven't seen us make the Kingmaker, click right here.